Welcome once again, my fellow manipulators of digital fate. I'm Richie, this is Capricorn, and today I have the grand finale, the last spoiler video for Outlaws of Thunder Junction, and this is the final half of the big score cards that have been spoiled. Now, once this video is over, we'll be done with all of the spoiler videos where we go over each spoiler as it's dropped in our first impressions, right? But I do have a bunch more set spoiler content coming over the next few days. Starting with set reviews for each color and multicolor and colorless. Now that we've had a little bit more time to sit with the cards and really let it kind of stew, I'm going to give you my genuine thoughts on each color, the best cards for limited, the best cards for constructed, and that should be pretty interesting. We're going to follow that up with my top 10 of the set, which should also be interesting. And then finally, we're going to have a video about the 10 or 12 decks I'm most excited to brew, letting you guys know the different sort of deck tech synergies I'm going to be exploring as soon as this set is released so we can hit the ground running. And I'm also going to have a poll up on Patreon so that you guys can vote on which of those decks you'd want to see first. So if you're interested in something like that, check out the Patreon. I have it linked in the About section. But with all of that out of the way, let me know in a comment what card so far out of all of the spoilers of all of Thunder Junction, not just Big Score, what card are you most excited about? And what deck are you most excited about using it in? I'm just really interested to know like what cards specifically are hitting you guys now that we're at the tail end of spoiler season and we know everything that's in the set. But anyway, with all of that out of the way, I know, I ramble. Let's get to the cards. We're going to start here with Fomori Vault. Now, this is the namesake of the big score. The entire point behind the big score is they are laying siege to this vault. You know, they're breaking in and they're trying to steal the stash that's inside. This is a land, taps for a colorless. You can pay 3, tap it, discard a card. Look at the top X cards of your library, where X is the number of artifacts you control. Put one of those cards into your hand and the rest on the bottom of your library in a random order. Now, this does only make colorless mana, and it is kind of expensive to use, and you do have to discard a card to use it, so it's not sheer card advantage. But all of that being said, being able to tutor up pretty much any card every single turn in a reusable way in a deck that's going wide enough with artifacts could be really, really crazy. It has to go in just the right deck, I think. And as formats get older, as we get into older formats, I think this will become more and more useful as there's more broken, cheap ways of getting lots of artifacts into play. You have things like Affinity, and this card's going to be a slam dunk with stuff like that. But even in Standard, there might be a spot for it. We have a lot of artifact synergy and a lot of artifact support in Standard now because of 3-year rotation, because we didn't lose like all of the Innistrad and New Capenna cards, and Kamigawa Neon Dynasty. There's a lot more support for something like that than there otherwise would have been. We still have Anvil in the format, right? So the potential of this card, even as maybe just a one-of in Standard, in the right deck, is also there as well. But I'm not 100% sure if it'll see play in Standard. It'll definitely see play in older formats. But let me know what you think of Standard in a comment. Next up, we have Tarnation Vista. Another land enters the battlefield tapped. As it enters, you choose a color. You tap it for 1 mana of the chosen color, or you can pay 1 mana and tap it, and for each color among mono-colored permanents you control, add 1 mana of that color. Now, what's important to note here is you don't get a mana for each mono-colored permanent. You only get a mana for each color that exists among all mono-colored permanents you control, which means if you have any mono-colored permanents that are green, you're going to get 1 mana. Whether that's 1 mono-green permanent or 7 mono-green permanents, that's going to give you 1. And then if you also have a mono-black permanent, you'll get 2 mana out of this. No matter how many mono-black or mono-green, as long as you have 1 of each, you can get 2 mana. So every color that's represented among your mono-color permanents is going to give you a mana, which is kind of a big hoop to have to jump through. It seems very, very difficult. You basically have to have 5 different mono-colored permanents in play just for this to give you a net value of 3 mana, because you're tapping this land, you're paying 1 other mana, so you're basically using 2 mana, So at most you make 5. And that's only if you have 5 different multicolor permanents in play. So you get at most a net of 3 mana. I think in just the right deck, this could be good. Most of the time, this isn't going to be worth using. I think the best option is probably Shrines in older formats, because you're trying to get out these monocolored Shrines anyway. So if you can just pop this into that deck, it perfectly supports the deck play style that you're already going for. And I think it's sort of a free add for that deck. But outside of that, very difficult to find a use here. Next up, we've got Ancient Cornucopia. This is 1 green and 2 for an artifact. Whenever you cast a spell that's 1 or more colors, you may gain 1 life for each of that spell's colors. And you do this only once each turn. And then it can tap for a mana of any color. So a mana rock for 3 mana is pretty standard. One that can tap for a mana of any color is usually much better than sometimes we don't get them that good, right? Sometimes it's a specific color or colorless. But with this being a mythic, the extra static ability upside, I kind of expected more from it, you know? Granted, you do get free life gain for, you know, at least 1 spell you cast every single turn without having to do anything else. You don't have to jump through any hoops. You don't have to pay any extra mana. Your mana rock that you're using as a mana rock anyway just gives you free life every turn. And that's kind of good. I think the problem is you see the mythic rarity on this. You expect so much that ability is a disappointment. But at the end of the day, I actually think it's kind of okay and might see some use. I think Celestis is better, but Celestis is legendary, right? But in just the right deck, I mean, where you want life gain, and this is just giving you free life gain every turn, it could be worth playing. It's also worth noting that if you're playing something like Commander, something multiplayer, you're going to be able to trigger this once on every turn. So in that way, you could get all of the value in the world off this in the right Commander deck, which could be relevant, but I don't know, I'm kind of underwhelmed by this card. Speaking of underwhelmed, Territory Forge. 1 red and 4 for an artifact. When it enters the battlefield, if you cast it, exile target artifact or land. And then Territory Forge has all activated abilities of the exiled card. So, 5 mana, exile any artifact or land, gain the abilities. What's important to note is it only exiles if you cast it. So you can't make copies of Territory Forge, you can't make token copies or anything and have them trigger and exile more things. That would have been crazy. You have to actually cast this from your hand, right? I think one good way to use it could potentially be in a deck where you're able to constantly return this to your hand and recast it, because the one upside it has over most exile removal permanents that exile is most things, they return the thing that you exiled if they go away. This doesn't do that. If this goes away, whatever you exiled with it is still exiled forever. So if you could just bounce this to your hand and replay it and exile something else and find a way to keep doing that, maybe find a way to reduce the cost of artifacts so you can do it more efficiently, that could be something. It is a lot of hoops to jump through, so I'm going to guess it's probably not good enough. It probably doesn't make it there, but it is some potential. And also just the Forge getting all of the abilities of the exiled card could be super relevant, right? If you're playing this on the One Ring, it's going to be really good. Like in older formats, being able to remove the One Ring permanently, get around the indestructible of the One Ring, also turn this into a One Ring for you, seems really good to me, right? So maybe it's a sideboard card in older formats for that specific purpose. Maybe there's some other ways to use this that I haven't thought of, so if you thought of anything, let me know in a comment, because I feel like there's something we're missing, right? There's got to be something else we can do with this. Next up, we've got Greed's Gambit. This is 1 black and 3 for an enchantment. When it enters the battlefield, you draw 3 cards, gain 6 life, create 3/2/1 black bat creature tokens with flying. That's a lot of value for 4 mana, not to mention it's an enchantment, so it can, you know, double up on your enchantment synergies, stuff like Hallowed Haunting or Machiko's Reign of Truth or whatever, in addition to all this insane value you get off of playing it. But of course, there's a downside. At the beginning of your end step, you discard a card, lose 2 life, sacrifice a creature. Woof. So over the course of 3 turns, you're going to lose everything you got, and then continue to lose more than that subsequently on turns after that. But it doesn't end there, because when Greed's Gambit leaves the battlefield, you discard 3 cards, lose 6 life, and sacrifice 3 creatures. So you can't even get rid of it to something like Beseech the Mirror, bargain it away, or whatever, and get rid of the downside. That makes this card incredibly tricky to use. Maybe you still want to use it if you want to discard and want to sacrifice things, but probably not. Maybe you can use it in some sort of you phase it away so that it's phased. It didn't technically leave the battlefield, so you won't get the end of step triggers. But it didn't technically leave, so you don't have to sacrifice a whole bunch at once. Maybe you can use it, I think the best way to use it is just to donate it to your opponent, right? We have Coveted Falcon in Standard right now, that when it becomes unmasked, when you pay the disguise cost, you can give your opponent a bunch of stuff. Give them the Greed's Gambit. There's also a new card in this set, Shifting Grift, that allows you to trade one of your enchantments for one of their enchantments. So you can do some really cool things where, you know, give it to them with Coveted Falcon, or if you have the Coveted Falcon turning face up before they even, you know, before you have your Greed's Gambit, you could give them whatever enchantment so that later on Shifting Grift can trade that enchantment back for them getting the Greed's Gambit. So there's some interesting stuff you can do with this for sure, but it's going to be a really tricky build around. I think if you manage to find a way that's consistently able to get the value off of this and then like mitigate the downside, it could be a contender. It could be a bomb. Is there a synergy I'm overlooking and I'm missing? Let me know in a comment. Next up, we've got Molten Duplication. 1 red and 1 for a sorcery. Create a token that's a copy of target artifact or creature you control, except it's an artifact in addition to its other types. It gains haste until end of turn. Sacrifice it at the beginning of the next end step. There's some really cool ways to use this. There's another artifact that we went over in the last Big Score spoiler breakdown video that allowed you to, basically anytime you sacrifice an artifact, you can pay 2 mana and get a copy of it at end of turn. This would allow you to make a token of anything. It becomes an artifact, so when it becomes sacrificed, it will trigger that other thing, and you can get, for 2 mana, you can get a copy of it that stays for free. That could be kind of cool. I think the best way that I want to use this is just with 𝑅𝑎𝑑𝑟𝑎𝑏𝑎𝑐ℎ, honestly. Just like Jaxis could in some of the older deck tech videos that I did back in the day when 𝑅𝑎𝑑𝑟𝑎𝑏𝑎𝑐ℎ was new. This can just 2 mana, make a copy of 𝑅𝑎𝑑𝑟𝑎𝑏𝑎𝑐ℎ, it immediately dies to the legend rule, creates a non-legendary version of itself that now does not have this stipulation of needing to be sacrificed at the end of turn. It's just an easy 2 mana way of getting 2 𝑅𝑎𝑑𝑟𝑎𝑏𝑎𝑐ℎs onto the field so you can start to multiply your board of legends, and I kind of love that. There's got to be some other ways, though. There's got to be some other crazy busted things you can do with this. Obviously, you can get Natalie, you can get Atraxa, you can get the triggers and all of that, but those are legends, so they die right away. What am I missing? There's got to be something I'm missing. Let me know. Next up, we have Hostile Investigator. I kind of love this guy. I think a lot of people have been shitting on him lately. They don't understand just how much automatic value it is. On the surface, it just looks like it's an expensive burglar rat, and it's really off-putting. But when you really think about exactly what this card gives you, it's actually really good. 4 mana for a 4/3 body, right? It's an Ogre Rogue Detective. When it enters the battlefield, target opponent discards a card, so that's the burglar rat side of it. And then whenever 1 or more players discard 1 or more cards, you get to investigate, but this ability triggers only once each turn. So, just as the floor, this is a 4 mana 4/3, which is an on-rate relevant body that makes them discard a card and immediately triggers its second ability when they discard that card, giving you a clue token. So it's an automatic 3-for-1. You have a 4/3 body, they have a card gone from their hand, and you have the potential to draw another card with the clue token. Automatic 3-for-1 no matter what. Even if they kill the investigator, it did its job. Even if you trade with a 4 toughness creature, it doubly did its job, right? And not only that, but if it sticks around, it will start to create more clue tokens in subsequent turns if you have any more discard potential, discard opportunity within the deck. So it's an automatic 3-for-1 that gives you even more value later in the game if you happen to be able to trigger its conditions. And I just think that that's really good. I mean, it doesn't want to go in any deck. It's not just going to replace 𝐻𝑒𝑚𝑒𝑟𝑟. But if you're in a deck that's utilizing a lot of discard, or utilizing clue tokens or artifact tokens, or maybe best case scenario both, you could do a lot worse than to have this as your 4-drop. It can just provide a ton of value that on paper doesn't look like a lot. It's very easy to overlook, but I think in practice is going to be super, super effective. I'm stoked to use it with Braids. You can use it with Braids and that 1 mana enchantment that when it comes down, they discard a card and lose 2 life, because like that's going to trigger this, and then you can sack it to Braids. Not only that, but all the clue tokens that you're making could potentially be sacked to Braids. Just seems like there's a lot of synergy there. So I think that's one of the decks that we're going to be building pretty early on. Maybe not one of the first 10, but pretty early on in Outlaws of Thunder Junction. I think it's just sweet. Next up, we have Sandstorm Salvager. 1 green and 2 for a 1/1 human artificer. When he enters the battlefield, you make a 3/3 colorless golem artifact creature token, and then you can pay 2 mana and tap him to put a +1/+1 counter on each creature token you control. They gain trample until end of turn. This guy's just nuts. 3 mana for a total of 4 power, 4 toughness across 2 bodies, and this ability that literally buffs up your entire team of tokens with +1/+1 counters that stay forever, and gives them trample until end of turn, like as if the token wasn't going to be enough, right? As if the counters weren't going to be enough. This just does everything you want in Token Tribal. If you're in a very, very deep token deck where you're making tons of tokens, this guy is absolutely a slam dunk. It's going to be so good. Not only that, you can use it with stuff like Agatha's Soul Cauldron, exile it from the graveyard to get its ability to put counters on all of your stuff, and then all of those things with counters now have the ability, which gets kinda crazy. I just feel like there's a lot of ways to use this. It looks like a really exciting build around, but also kinda slots in pretty easily to some existing archetypes already, and it just provides a ton of value. I'm really excited to see what we can do with it. What can we do with it? Let me know. And with that out of the way, a man needs his coffee, okay? So, cheers. Now, while I'm fetching some delicious nectar of the gods, I'm going to take this moment to go over one card that we missed, one of the rares from the base set of Outlaws of Thunder Junction, and that's because at the time it was spoiled, it was only available to me in a foreign language. But now we have the English version. This is 𝑠𝑒𝑟𝑎𝑝hic Steed, 1 white, 1 green for a unicorn mount. It's a 2/2 with first strike and lifelink. Whenever it attacks while saddled, you make a 3/3 white angel creature token with flying, and it saddles for 4. I have a lot of plans with this guy, because Mount Tribal is going to be a real thing. And if you doubt me, you just wait and see, because I've got insane ideas. But this guy being able to generate 3/3s every turn, not only that, but if you play a roaming throne, the roaming throne is big enough to saddle the steed and then give you double triggers so that you get 2 angels. That's just the tip of the iceberg. I have a lot planned for that deck, and I'm excited to talk about it, but that's for another video. But hey, coffee. Nectar of the gods. Glorious nectar of the gods. Where were we? Harvester of Misery. 2 black and 3 for a 5/4 spirit with menace. When it enters the battlefield, other creatures get -2/-2 until end of turn. That already super good, especially with standard being in the spot it is right now, with Boros Convoke running rampant, mono red still being a problem, mono white still being a good deck. Something like this that can come down and be a relevant threat. 5 power body with menace, knock out all of their small creatures. Maybe they only have 1 big creature that survives it, and the menace helps you get around that. Tons of value. But as if that wasn't enough, you can pay 2 mana, discard it to give any creature -2/-2 until end of turn. So it has a similar upside to Virtue of Persistence, where this can be your late game, somewhat bomby play against certain decks. But also if you have it early, and you just need to get rid of something early on turn 2, you can just use it as your removal. So a card like this being able to basically fill 2 roles in the same deck is really, really important for making sure you curve out really effectively. I just kind of love it. Not only that, but it's a discard effect, right? So it can't be countered. and it's a -2/-2, so you can't save it with like indestructibility. There's just so much this does in such an elegant way. It's very easy to just look at it and go, okay, it's just a creature that does a thing and doesn't kill stuff with 3 toughness. But I think this card is just nuts. Another thing that's worth noting is you can use it with Trumpeting Carnosaur, so that when you discover 5, you could potentially hit a Harvester of Misery, and it's another card you could have in a deck like that where it's a big hit off of a big Discover 5, but it can still be your cheap removal earlier in the game. It could potentially fit into that Invasion of Alara combo deck that we saw a little while ago, where you're trying to make sure nothing in the deck costs less than 4, or I think it's less than 5, right? So that Invasion of Alara always hits, you know, the specific cards it needs to hit in order to combo off. This is another way to include removal in that deck. So a lot of cool potential here. I think this card's just a slam dunk, and I'm excited to brew with it for sure, especially just to put Boros Convoke in its place, because that deck is annoying. Very annoying. Next up, we have Bristlebud Farmer. 2 green and 2 for a 5/5 plant druid with trample, and when Bristlebud Farmer enters the battlefield, create 2 food tokens. That's already pretty good. Do you guys remember when Juzam Jin was like a big deal because it was the only 5/5 creature you could get for 4 mana? It was like, that was like an insane cost for your power and toughness. Maybe you don't. Maybe I'm dating myself, because that was an awful long time ago. But power creep is real. Now we have a 5/5 trampler with no downside for 4 mana, and you get 2 food tokens, and as if that wasn't enough, whenever he attacks, you can sacrifice one of the foods, and if you do, you mill 3 cards and put a permanent from among them into your hand, which means if he sticks around long enough, not only did you get the 2 free food tokens that stay if your opponent uses removal on them, but you've also been able to turn those food tokens into actually relevant permanents back to your hand that you can cast. So 3-for-1 card advantage if he can just stick it out 2.5 turns and get in for a couple of attacks. That's wild. Add more food into the mix, anything that's just constantly putting out food, and he can just do this every turn, not just 2 turns, right? Seems kind of crazy, especially crazy in Insidious Roots, because it counts as a plant. It counts as a plant. It's filling up your graveyard to provide fuel for Insidious Roots so that it has more things to exile to go off. When it does go off, the Bristlebud Farmer gets a counter because it's a plant, and not only that, but the other ability of the farmer is not only are you milling those cards, you're also pulling a permanent from out of there and putting it in your hand, which if it's a creature will trigger the Insidious Roots as well. So it's just insane synergy with Roots, which was obviously the purpose, I think, of this card. But the thing is, even without Roots, even just by itself, this card is just really good. It has tons of late game potential while being a super important threat on curve. Does it even just go in mono green? It might. Let me know. I don't know. It's so good. But we're going to move on. Next up, we've got Collector's Cage. This is 1 white and 1 for an artifact. It has Hideaway 5. So when it enters the battlefield, you get to look at the top 5 cards of your library, exile one of them face down, and then put the rest on the bottom in a random order. And then you can pay 1, tap this at any time to put a +1/+1 counter on any creature you control. So it's kind of like a Luminarch Aspirant that's harder to kill because it's not a creature, but it costs a mana to activate. So trade-offs. But then if you control 3 or more creatures with different powers, which shouldn't be hard to do with this ability, you may play the exiled card without paying its mana cost, the one that you hit with the Hideaway. This just seems insane. First of all, it's only 2 mana, which is the cheapest Hideaway 5 card that we've seen in a while. We got a cycle of Hideaway enchantments last year, I think it was. Maybe it was the year before. They're in Standard, and it's really rare to see one at this cheap of a cost, which is already pretty good. But then the thing that I have to make a note of that I think is most important about this card that most people are probably overlooking is the fact that this is an artifact. None of those other Hideaways are artifacts, they're all enchantments. And the one thing that makes an artifact sets an artifact apart from an enchantment in an important way with an ability like this, an ETB ability, is there are a lot of cards in Standard that can flicker or blink artifacts or creatures, and can't hit enchantments. That was a change they made back when sagas were introduced, and they realized that blinking sagas was just going to be way too powerful. They started to slowly shift towards most of the blink and flicker effects that we get can't hit enchantments anymore. This is not an enchantment, so you can let it come down, hide away the best card on the top 5, trigger it, play it for free, and then you can flicker or blink this to hide something else away, and then use its ability a second time too if you want to, which is also kind of crazy, right? So the ability to just continuously hide away 5 and play things for free, like every time you flicker this in a flicker blink style deck, just makes this insane, on top of the fact that it's like super cheap and it's providing you value immediately. Granted, it's not free like fight rigging. You don't get the counter for free. But something that's important to note is you get the counter at instant speed. You don't have to do it as a sorcery. So even though you have to pay a mana, right? It's not like fight rigging where your opponent knows where the counter is and can block effectively. You can go into combat with this and they have no idea where you're going to put the counter, and you could just blow them out with a trick. Not only that, you could double blow them out by putting the counter somewhere specific and then also playing something crazy from your hand in the middle of combat. Or not from hand, from exile with the hideaway. So many cards. I'm getting scatterbrained and losing my mind. But I just think there's a ton of value in this card. I think even just in like a normal mono white aggro style deck, I think this is good enough because it's cheap enough and it's got a relevant ability that increases your board state while also potentially giving you a free card later. So even if you're not built around maximizing that hideaway and making sure you can play it no matter what as quick as possible, there's still value there on top of, you know, the other ability that's just useful in aggro or mid-range decks. So I just think this card has everything you want. I think it's a slam dunk. I think it's going to see a lot of play, and I'm excited to build around it. Next up, we have Generous Plunderer. What I think is one of the most busted cards that we've seen out of the big score. And it doesn't seem like many people agree with me, which is a little disheartening, but I can see why this one would fly under the radar. 2/2 human rogue with menace for 1 red and 1. So a decent little body, although, you know, we do like to see 3 power on a 2-drop these days, but I think that's asking for a bit much. At the beginning of your upkeep, you may create a treasure token. When you do, target opponent creates a tapped treasure token, and then whenever Generous Plunderer attacks, it deals damage to defending player equal to the number of artifacts they control. Now, there's a lot to point out here. First of all, it's a rogue, so it fits into Outlaws Tribal, which is a huge bonus because Outlaws Tribal is really good in this set, and it has a lot of really good payoffs. But more importantly than that, it has the menace, so if they only have 1 blocker, and you want to be able to trigger that ability where they take damage equal to the number of artifacts they have, you can safely swing in against 1 blocker because of the menace and not lose your Plunderer. So it's a nice little bit of extra evasion that's not always going to be relevant, but sometimes will, which is nice silver lining. What's also important to note is you get to choose whether you trigger the treasure ability. So if you're really worried about what your opponent's going to use the treasure for, just choose not to make the treasure token. It's fine, right? But if you do make the treasure token, this can come down on 2, can make a treasure token on 3, you can play a 4-drop on turn 3 with this guy and swing in and ping for at least 1 damage from the treasure they made, and they can't use that treasure to stop you because it comes in tapped. So they can't use their instant speed stuff with mana they wouldn't have had anyway. You didn't enable them to really just blow you out, you know. It just kind of does everything. I think people are overlooking all of the subtleties to how this card works. Even just on its floor, being able to swing in with menace for 2, ping for an extra point of damage, and play a 4-drop on turn 3 because of ramp is a ton. Even if they do end up having a treasure token they can untap on the next turn and ramp by 1. You already ramped by 1. So it's just slightly symmetrical, except you got all the value in the world out of your stuff before they could use their thing, and I think that's worth it. But ignoring all of that, there's also the potential you're playing against an artifact deck, and if you're going wide with 3 or 4 or maybe even 5 artifacts down, if you have map tokens or blood tokens or whatever, and this guy swings, you could take 3, 4, 5 damage to the head just immediately, and you don't even have to activate that first ability. You don't have to give them any treasure tokens at all. You could just be swinging and doing a bunch of extra damage to them. I just think when you really look deeply at everything this does at every level, it just seems insane. It just seems like absolute gas. You don't have to give them the treasure if you think it's going to be more beneficial to deny them the mana, but having the option, getting to make the choice, and when it's the situation's right for it, just getting that insane ramp value, extra damage, like, it just seems like it's a tempo player's dream. And I kind of love it. At the very least, it's gotta make the cut in sideboards, right? For artifact heavy decks, because it just rips them apart. I just love this card. I think it's bananas. Let me know in a comment, do you disagree with me, or do you think I'm spot on? Because I feel like I'm in Crazy Town. I feel like I'm in the Twilight Zone, because everyone I've talked to thinks that this card is just mid, and I'm just over here being like, what the hell? This card is insane gas. But anyway, we're gonna get on to my favorite card of the day, the last card of the day. This is Lost Jitte. Jitte. We're gonna pronounce it both ways because I can. Hashtag deal with it. Legendary artifact equipment for 1 mana. Whenever a equipped creature deals combat damage, you put a charge counter on the Lost Jitte. Remove a charge counter from Lost Jitte. Choose one. Untap a land. Target creature can't block this turn, or put a +1/+1 counter on equipped creature. And it equips for just 1. Couple important things to note here. Yes, it is not as good as Umezawa's Jitte. It is not as good as that card, but that card was absolutely busted and insano, right? The difference here is Umezawa's cost 2 and cost 2 to equip, right? But it would get 2 charge counters and the abilities were more powerful. This, the upside to this is that it's a lot cheaper. It can come down for just 1 mana that you might happen to have left over with nothing else to play. It can help you go wide with a very cheap artifact for decks that care about going wide with artifacts, things like Chico's Reign of Truth and all of that. Very, very cheap way to get an extra artifact onto the field. And it re-equips for just 1. So with this re-equipping for just 1, and it being the Jitte itself that gets the counters, this thing becomes very, very powerful. If you swing in and get a couple counters on this over the course of a couple turns, you can save them up, use them all to untap lands, and effectively ramp out to something huge. You could do a turn 4, a turn 5 𝑇𝑒𝑟𝑟 or Atraxa under the right circumstances, right? Just by using the counters from Jitte to untap your lands and getting extra ramp. Or if you need to use them for other abilities right now, you can force their creature to not be able to block so that you can get through with an Alpha Strike to win, or so that you can make a key attack land on the opponent. If you have something like Gix in play, or you attacked with a Glissa or whatever, and you just need to get through. But then the +1/+1 counters as well. You can activate that in combat. So if you saved up a couple of charge counters, now your opponent has no idea when you're ever gonna potentially make your creature buffed, right? If they have a 4/4 and you're swinging with a 3/3 that's got the Jitte equipped, and you have 2 charge counters on it, they don't want to block it, because you could just, without spending any mana at all, just remove those counters to make your guy a 5/5, kill their 4/4 and blow them out. So they kind of have to just let it through, and then you can just keep saving the counters for potentially other stuff later on down the line. But I think the most important thing that's worth noting here is it's whenever it deals combat damage, you get a charge counter. It's not whenever it deals combat damage to the opponent, which means if the creature that's equipped with the Jitte trades in combat with one of their creatures, it still did combat damage. You still get another counter on the Jitte, and then you just spend 1 mana, equip it to another creature, and you've got an extra charge counter on it, ready to go, which is also kind of crazy. but also with First Strike, you could hit with your creature, get a charge counter before you go to normal combat damage, and then you can use that charge counter to mitigate that normal combat damage. You know, maybe both your creatures are 3/3s, or maybe you've got a 3/3 First Striker and he's got a 3/4 and he blocks, but you deal your damage first, you get the counter, and then before it goes to normal damage, you can put a counter on your First Striker, a +1/+1 counter, making it a 4/4, and then it doesn't die in combat. You can do little weird things like that because of First Strike, which is really cool. Or you could like First Strike, get a charge counter, use it to untap a land before you go to normal damage, and then use that land to play an instant speed trick in the middle of combat that saves your guy and kills theirs. There's a lot of potential. But then that potential gets even crazier if you give your creature double strike. Because now every time your equipped creature attacks, you're basically going to do combat damage twice in one turn and get 2 counters off of a double striker. So there's just a lot of potential, a lot of ways to really take this card and put it over the top. And like I said, most of the time you're going to try and save up those charge counters to ramp into something crazy way earlier than you should be playing it. But then you have these other abilities as threat of activation, things you can do in the right situations. It's just a lot. It's just really, really, really good, specifically because of how cheap it is and how cheap it is to equip. It's almost free. It's not free, but it's cheap enough that you don't have to like spend your turn doing it, right? You can do mostly what you would have done anyway and just use your extra mana to do whatever. So I just think this card is really crazy. Do you agree with me? Is this the best card from the big score? It might not be the best card. Honestly, the best card might be Generous Plunderer. I'm not sure. Or maybe I'm just way too high on 2 cards that aren't really the best, but I don't know. I think there's something there. I think we might be onto something. So let me know in the comments how you're feeling. But that's all the spoilers for Outlaws of Thunder Junction. We did it. That's the finale. We finished it. We got there. Like I said, we got way more videos coming. I got my set reviews coming for each color, multicolor, and colorless. I'm going to let you guys know what the best cards for limited are, what my best picks for constructed are within each color. And then we're going to move on to my top 10 of the set. We're going to do the next 10 or 12, my first 10 or 12 brews that I'm excited to make. I'm going to key you guys in on what I'm really looking forward to making. And then that poll's going to go up on Patreon. Remember, that's linked in the About section. For even just $1, you can join at the $1 tier and get to vote on which of those decks happens first, so that instead of having to wait 2 weeks to finally see the deck idea, if there's something you really want to see, you can make sure you see it right away in the first couple days. So if you're interested in that, do the thing. The videos are coming. The set's going to be crazy, and I can't wait to hit the ground running and start playing with these cards. Yeah, thanks for hanging out. Thanks for checking out this video. Please like the video so that I can get out to way more people, because it just helps me so much, and I really do appreciate it. And subscribe if you're new, because so much more is on the way, and I'd love for you to be a part of it. So with all that out of the way, thanks for hanging. Till next time, always make them scoop. Thanks so much for checking out my channel. I'd like to give a huge shout out to all of my patrons over at Patreon. Without you guys, this channel would not be possible, so honestly, thank you from the bottom of my heart for all of your contributions. If you haven't yet, like and subscribe. The more likes we get and the quicker we get them, the bigger this channel will grow and the faster it will grow. I'd love nothing more than this channel to become something very special for you guys, but it's entirely up to you how fast that happens. Also, if you'd like more deck text, that's somewhere over there. And if you'd like to see what else the channel's been up to lately, that's somewhere up that way. Also, subscribe, circle below, do all the things.